Unit 1. Lesson 1. Listening Comprehension Practice.
This exercise is for intermediate to advanced learners of English, so we use words and phrases specially designed for people learning English.
Listening Practice 1. Speaking with an accent. Welcome to today's listening and language study session. Before we play the audio, let's take a look at what this conversation is about and what you are going to learn from it.
You are about to listen to a discussion among a group of speakers, including individuals named Ken and Sue, who are sharing their perspectives on regional accents, language evolution, and societal perceptions of speech.
By actively listening to this audio, you will explore the following concepts. The status of regional accents. You will learn about the ongoing shift in how regional accents are perceived in England, including their increasing social acceptability in broadcasting media like the BBC.
Vocal variety across borders. The speakers compare the diversity of accents within Britain to those in the United States, debating the specific pronunciation features, such as how different cultures pronounce the R sound at the end of words.
The sociolinguistics of accent and class. You will learn about a unique experiment conducted by linguists in New York City department stores aimed at investigating how pronunciation correlates with social status.
Stereotypes and language prejudice. The audio addresses common assumptions people subconsciously make about a person's intelligence or education level based on whether they speak with a rural or urban accent.
The concept of received pronunciation, RP. You will hear a discussion on the role of RP, often called the BBC accent, including its advantages, the potential social handicaps it carries, and why it remains a global standard for foreigners learning English.
As you listen to the audio, pay close attention to the differing viewpoints of the speakers and notice the specific examples they give regarding American, British, and regional speech patterns. Have your pen and notebook ready, focus on the flow of the conversation, and let's begin.
Speaking with an accent.
I think it's a great shame the way regional accents seem to be dying out in England, don't you?
I don't think they are. In fact, I think there's been a bit of a revival recently. I mean, maybe true of dialects, but not accents. In fact, the regional accent is socially acceptable in all walks of life now, I think. Think of the BBC. I mean, they have announcers and presenters with Scots accents. One of its political reporters has a strong Northern Ireland accent.
Yeah, you can't understand him very well.
No, seriously, I think it's wonderful. There's such an enormous range of accents in your country. Britain is I don't know, about a 16th the size of the States, but it's got more variety, more vocal variety than America.
All Americans sound the same to me. I mean, they all they all pronounce R at the end of every word.
Oh, that's not true.
Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, many British speakers do the same. You think of the West Country burr, and in Scotland there's a slight audible R at the end of words.
Oh, that reminds me. I heard about this strange experiment they did in New York City. Linguists wanted to find out if lower class and middle class people pronounce that R sound differently. So they chose these 3 department stores in New York. One was a high status, and one was medium status, one was low status. And they found out what departments were on a particular floor. For instance, they went around asking all the assistants, where's the toy department or the bookstore or whatever, and they were all on the 4th floor. And so the answer they got was always 4th floor.
I like that. Yeah. Well, the trouble is, when you ask someone to pronounce something, they affect a high status pronunciation. Thinking that's the correct way to talk, I suppose. Certainly in the UK, the people with strongest accents are working class, I think, as in the United States.
I never thought about that.
You know what's strange is the way different sorts of accents, different sorts of sounds make you assume that people are slightly slow-witted or unintelligent, like West Country accents or Suffolk accent, because it's slow, a slow rural accent. But an urban accent like London or Liverpool just makes you sound uneducated. I mean, I know it's prejudice, but it's got something to do with what Ken's saying. But what I was trying to say is this the same in North America?
Yeah, probably to a lesser extent. I think there's a working class accent in New York City and Chicago, or pretty well any city, but especially
so the Bronx.
That's right. People talk like that, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything except that.
Do you have a rural accent?
Well, yes, there are rural accents. I mean, you've probably heard, hillbillies in the South or, in the Midwest. But it's funny because a lot of the American presidents came from the South, like Johnson and Carter, and they get made fun of, really.
Yes.
Their accents, too.
What happened to me when I was in the States is people kept asking me to talk because they liked to listen to a British accent. I suppose it sounded sort of quaint to them. Waitresses in restaurants, particularly.
Gee, I just love your
British accent. Yeah.
Mind you, an accent like yours or mine, RP they call it, don't they, can be a handicap in some situations in this country. I mean, people think you're stuck up or trying to be superior.
Yes, but in general, RP has high prestige.
But it's funny because RP, as you call it, is only spoken by a tiny minority of people who speak English as their first language. So why is it, tell me, that it's become a model for almost all every foreigner learning the language?
Yes, mainly in Europe. It's not so much in Asia and Latin America. But I think it has to do with the prestige of RP in the UK, and the way it was the BBC accent for so long. BBC spans the world. And don't forget, RP, the accent of educated, middle-class Southern Britain, was also the accent of teachers.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I mean, there has got to be some sort of standard, even if it's an artificial one. Otherwise, people get confused and there's no sort of norm to stick to, is there? I mean, I've never met a foreigner that doesn't speak with an accent, but a national one rather than a regional one. And that's sometimes really enchanting, and I don't think we'd want to change that.
Unit 1, Lesson 2, Listening Comprehension Practice for Fluency.
This is aimed for intermediate and advanced students, and the topic is Discovering Unique American Traditions.
Welcome back to another listening proficiency session. Have you ever felt like every major holiday has become entirely predictable? Whether it's standing shoulder to shoulder in a freezing New York City crowd just to watch a glowing ball drop, or simply falling asleep on the couch, many of us are caught in a holiday rut. But what if we told you there is a completely different universe of celebration out there?
In today's audio exercise, we are going to explore the unique geography of American celebrations. You'll listen to a dynamic conversation analyzing 22 of the absolute best U.S. holiday destinations. We will contrast the massive, iconic, heavy-hitter spectacles with delightfully quirky, off-the-beaten-path local traditions, like a town in Wisconsin that drops an 80-pound wedge of cheese, or a volunteer post office in Indiana that answers thousands of children's letters to Santa.
What you will learn today: advanced listening comprehension. You will practice tracking a fast-paced, natural dialogue between two native speakers, focusing on how they compare and contrast different ideas.
Vocabulary and nuance. You will expose yourself to idiomatic expressions, cultural references, and vocabulary used to describe traditions, history, and travel geography.
Analytical thinking. You will learn how a town's local industry or historical footnotes can completely reshape a universal holiday, shifting your perspective on how culture and geography intersect.
Pay close attention to the specific examples, the reasons behind these unusual traditions, and the contrasting details. Get your ears ready, focus on the structure of the arguments, and let's dive straight into the conversation.
Do you ever find yourself doing like the exact same thing for every single major holiday?
Oh yeah, completely caught in a rut.
Right. Just totally predictable traditions. Like every New Year's Eve, you're either watching 1 million people stand elbow to elbow in the freezing New York City cold just to watch a glowing ball drop.
Or you're just asleep on the couch.
Exactly. But meanwhile, thousands of people in Wisconsin are warmly cheering for an 80-pound wedge of cheese to drop.
Which is just incredible.
It's a completely different universe of celebration.
Yeah, it explores 22 of the absolute best U.S. destinations for celebrating holidays.
Right, and it really contrasts these massive, iconic, kind of classic parties with these delightfully quirky, totally off the beaten path local traditions.
It's basically a study in the geography of American celebration.
So our mission today is to help you figure out your strategy for your next getaway. Like, should you stick to the famous heavy hitters, or should you go completely rogue and embrace small town quirks?
And what's really fascinating here is how a town's local industry, or even just a footnote in its history, completely reshapes how a universal holiday is celebrated.
Yeah, let's actually start with the winter escapes, right? New Year's Eve, Christmas, and Valentine's Day.
Because during those coldest, darkest months, Destinations essentially have to combat winter.
Right. They manufacture extreme levels of cheer and romance.
Exactly. They do it either through massive, massive budgets or just hyper-local novelty.
So if we're looking at New Year's Eve, the gold standard classic is obviously New York City's Times Square.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you have over 1 million people gathering to watch that crystal ball drop, which is a tradition that goes all the way back to 1907.
But the counter-programming is where it gets really fun. Let's look at Plymouth, Wisconsin.
Ah, the cheese drop.
Yes. They are the cheese capital of the world. So they drop a giant wedge of Sartori cheese.
Which is just brilliant. It's like swapping a stiff tuxedo for a cozy cheese-themed sweater.
Totally. And the real brilliance of Plymouth is that they execute this drop at 10 p.m.
Wait, really? Not midnight?
Nope, 10 p.m.
Oh, I love that. So families can celebrate early and actually get their kids to bed.
Exactly. It completely captures the family market.
That's amazing. And we see that same kind of divergence with Christmas and Valentine's Day too.
Oh, for sure.
Like for Christmas, the source points to NYC's Rockefeller Center. You've got the ice rink, the Rockettes. It's a massive spectacle.
It's basically a movie set.
Right. And then for Valentine's Day, the classic is Las Vegas. You get the Bellagio fountains, the Venetian gondolas.
Again, the alternatives are so much more interesting. Take Christmas. Instead of New York, the source highlights Santa Claus, Indiana.
Santa Claus, Indiana. I mean, they literally named the town after the holiday.
They did. And their big draw isn't a massive light show. It's a volunteer post office.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, every year, volunteers answer thousands of children's letters from all over the world. It's so community-driven.
That's so wholesome. But what about the Valentine's Day alternative?
So instead of Vegas, they suggest Valentine, Nebraska.
Okay, another town named after the holiday.
Right. You get special romantic postmarks. You can hike frozen waterfalls at Smith Falls State Park.
Wait, hike frozen waterfalls?
Yeah, and you stargaze at the Merritt Reservoir, which is a top dark sky destination.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this for a second.
Sure.
Las Vegas gives you, like, a replica of the Eiffel Tower, right? But Nebraska gives you the actual stars.
Exactly. Unfiltered nature.
But, I mean, are we confusing price tags with actual romance here?
Yeah.
Because Vegas is climate-controlled comfort, and Nebraska in February sounds, well, miserable.
It's freezing, but that's the point, actually.
The misery is the point.
The shared struggle is the point. You bundle up, you navigate this frozen trail together, and it creates a much deeper, more authentic bonding experience than just passively watching a fountain in the desert.
I guess that makes sense. It's like earning a memory instead of just buying one.
Exactly.
All right, so as we move out of winter, we get into the spring street parties, Mardi Gras, St. Patrick's Day, Cinco de Mayo.
Right, and moving away from the manufactured winter stuff,
Yeah.
spring holidays are all about communal, outdoor street takeovers.
The weather breaks and everyone just spills outside.
And this is where the historical bragging rights really get contested.
Okay, so let's talk Mardi Gras. I mean, New Orleans is the undisputed king of Fat Tuesday, right?
That's what everyone thinks, yeah.
You've got the crew of Endymion, the crew of Barkus with all the costume dogs, the king cake with the hidden plastic baby.
Oh yeah, New Orleans dominates the mind share completely.
But
Mobile, Alabama actually hosted America's very first Mardi Gras.
wait, what? Are you serious?
I am. Decades before New Orleans even started.
So does New Orleans just have a much better PR department? Like, how did Mobile lose the crown on their own invention?
Well, New Orleans evolved into this massive port city, right? So the party scaled globally. But Mobile never stopped celebrating. They still honor their roots with huge community parades and the Mobile Carnival Museum.
Wow. So New Orleans threw the party for the world, but Mobile kept the tradition for the locals.
Precisely. And you see similar geographic surprises with St. Patrick's Day and Cinco de Mayo.
Right, because for St. Patty's, Chicago is famous for dyeing their river emerald green.
Which is a massive municipal flex.
Totally. And for Cinco de Mayo, Los Angeles hosts the Fiesta Broadway, celebrating the 1862 Battle of Puebla, which makes total geographic sense.
But the quirky alternatives really throw logic out the window here.
Like where?
Well, for St. Patrick's Day, Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Arkansas, for St. Patrick's Day.
Yep. They host the world's shortest St. Patrick's Day parade.
I love that. How short are we talking?
It's on a tiny 98-foot stretch of Bridge Street.
98 feet. That's barely half a block.
That is the whole joke. They condense all that parade energy into a microscopic space. It's brilliant.
That is hilarious. What about Cinco de Mayo?
Denver, Colorado.
Wait, a snowy mountain town for Cinco de Mayo?
Right. But Denver pays homage to its massive Latino population with a huge bash in Civic Center Park. Taco eating contests, music, everything.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really shows that you don't need geographical logic like being near Mexico or Ireland to throw the country's most passionate cultural parties.
That's a really great point. And,
Yeah.
moving into summer and fall, the holidays themselves change a lot.
They do. They become less about pure partying and more anchored in defining moments of American history.
Memorial Day, Juneteenth, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Halloween.
And because these are historical milestones, the best places to go are often the places where the history actually happened.
Right. So for the summer milestones, the classics are pretty obvious. Washington, D.C. for Memorial Day.
Right. Arlington, the National Mall.
Yeah, and Galveston, Texas for Juneteenth, because that's where Union troops actually arrived in 1865 to announce emancipation. You have the Ashtonville Monument there.
Exactly. It's ground zero.
And then Boston for the 4th of July, obviously.
Yep.
Freedom Trail, the Boston Pops.
Boston commands the scale, but the hidden historical gems are fascinating. Like Waterloo, New York. It's officially the birthplace of Memorial Day.
Really? Not D.C.
Nope, Waterloo. And for Juneteenth, instead of Galveston, you can go to Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh, to the Greenwood District, Black Wall Street.
Exactly. They host a powerful community Juneteenth festival with the Greenwood Rising History Center. It's an incredible celebration of community resilience.
That is so powerful to celebrate the endurance and the rebuilding of that community.
It really is. And for the 4th of July, skip Boston and go to Bristol, Rhode Island.
Okay, why Bristol?
They hold the oldest continuous Independence Day celebration in the country, dating back to 1785.
Wait, 1785? That's barely after the ink dried on the Declaration of Independence.
I know, they've done it every single year since.
That is mind-blowing. Okay, so what about the fall harvests and haunts, Halloween and Thanksgiving?
Well, you know the classics.
Sure, Salem, Massachusetts for Halloween. They completely lean into their 1692 witch trial history for the whole month of October.
And Plymouth, Massachusetts for Thanksgiving. Mayflower II, Plymouth Rock.
But let me guess, the alternatives are totally different.
Way different. For Halloween, Anoka, Minnesota.
Anoka, do they do haunted houses or?
No, actually, they've been the Halloween capital of the world since the 1920s, but they focus on wholesome pumpkin carving instead of spooky scares.
That's kind of refreshing, actually. Just good old-fashioned harvest vibes.
Exactly. And for Thanksgiving, Jamestown, Virginia.
Jamestown. Wait, over Plymouth?
Yeah, because Jamestown actually had an English Thanksgiving observance in 1619.
Wait, 1619? That predates Plymouth by a lot.
It does.
Oh my gosh, it's like finding the indie band before they sold out arenas. Jamestown is the hipster Thanksgiving.
That is exactly what it is. You get to bypass the dominant Plymouth narrative and touch the older history.
I can just imagine someone saying, oh, you're celebrating Plymouth. How mainstream. I'm a 1619 Jamestown purist.
It's the ultimate historical flex at the dinner table.
It really is. So, to wrap this all up, whether you want to be elbow to elbow with 1 million people in Times Square or standing on a 98-foot street in Arkansas, there is a totally customized way to experience the calendar year.
Yeah, because travel isn't just about escaping. It's about seeing how different communities interpret the exact same calendar date through the lens of their unique local identity.
I love that. So look at your own hometown. Think about it. If it had to invent a quirky holiday drop at 10 p.m., what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question.
What's your town's version of the giant cheese wedge?
Hopefully something good.
Right, something to mull over until next time.
Thanks for being with us. See you on our next video. Let's speak up.